REC?
Okay, it's RECing.
Okay, the timer's going up and all that,
Where's the timer?
but it says REC.
I already started it.
It says REC.
And it's red.
Yeah, I already pressed it.
Yeah, it's Gucci.
Okay, alright, sit down.
All right, you can start.
Okay.
You're good.
Alright, let's get started. So again, make sure that you put your name on that sheet. Somebody take the fringes off when it gets around to you too for me, please. So again, test is on Thursday, 70 questions matching, and then there's three essay questions, you'll get 2. I'm not going to talk about the content of the essay questions during this time, but they're posted on the wiki, and if you're doing the Twitter chat, I'm going to start looking at that and replying. If you look at what people have said and look at my replies, that helps you to study for the essay, okay? So again, 3 options, you pick 2, every class gets different ones. So, I'm going to focus on the 70 matching questions. So we have 7 chapters, so there's 10 per chapter. And it's pretty much just definitions for this part. The application part of the test will be corresponding with the essay piece. So, if you remember now, chapter 8 has to do with development across the lifespan. So basically there's a bunch of different theories. Most of them are stage-based, meaning you go through this stage, then this stage, then this stage, then this stage. And they all kind of have, at their core, a discussion about that concept that we addressed a whole bunch of nature and nurture, right? So what's the difference between nature and nurture? Let's start with that.
Nature is biological, nurture is like how you're raised.
Yep, or the stimulus in the environment at a given time. Yep. So nature is something that's present within an individual. Nurture is how you were raised, the values you were brought up with, the rewards and punishments that you're experiencing in a given moment. Okay? So, be aware of some of the different theories and explanations with that regarding nature and nurture. For example, one of the big theorists in this unit, probably the one that gets referenced the most, is a guy named Jean Piaget. Remember how we talked about the 8 main perspectives in psychology? What perspective is Piaget from? What's his main focus? Is it psychodynamic? Is it evolutionary? Nope.
Cognitive?
Cognitive is correct. So, Piaget kind of focused on how as you develop, you progress through these different cognitive stages. What's the first of Piaget's stages?
They're operational.
Sensory motor. And that's when you're younger, that's where you just respond to stimulus in your environment. Second stage is pre-operational. That's where you first use symbols. Third stage, concrete operational, where you see cause and effect. And then the last stage, formal operational. That's where you think abstractly and critically. So roughly the ages are 0 to 2, 2 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 and older, roughly. He didn't think it was like the day you turn 12 you transfer, right? So it varies from kid to kid. So if you remember, I showed some videos where they had kids with water, and then they'd say, how much water is in these cups? And the kids would look at them and they'd be like, they're the same. And then they'd dump one of the water out, the kid would watch the water go in a different glass, and then the kid would be like, wow, it has more all of a sudden. So if the kid does that, what stage are they still in? Pre-operational. They don't see causation yet. So they haven't entered into the concrete operation. So Piaget is one of the theories that we talked about in this chapter. Another one is Lawrence Kohlberg and the theory of moral development. Kohlberg had 3 levels. Each level is divided into 2 stages. For our purposes, you don't need to know the stages, but you should be aware of the levels. The terminology that Kohlberg used was called conventional, and then he just has a prefix or a suffix. So it's conventional is the middle stage. What's the first stage?
Pre-conventional.
Pre-conventional, and the last one? Post-conventional. So a lot of people on the clicker quiz mixed up pre-operational and pre-conventional. Remember, operational is a Piaget term, right? Concrete operational, formal operational. So conventional is a Kohlberg term. So one of the ways I remember that is operation has a P in it for Piaget, right? Conventional and Kohlberg, I mean it's K and C, but it kind of sounds the same, okay? That's the little mental trick I use to remember the difference. So, in pre-conventional, what is the thing that determines morality?
If it feels good, it's right.
If it feels good, it's right. Conventional, what's it based on? Rules, good. And then the last one, post-conventional. Abstract values. So to give you a couple examples applicationally, I think I told every class a story about how one day, 2 years ago on May 7th, I drove like 80 down Veterans. Did I tell you all that story?
Yeah.
That was, my wife sent me a text and said, you need to get home now. She's like a week overdue. All capital letters, 8 exclamation points. I'm like, I need to get home at this time. So it was a nice day, kind of like this. No ice, May 7th. I didn't drive 80 the whole way. Like I stopped at stoplights and stuff, but there was an open stretch where nobody was in front of me. I put our Honda Pilot down. So in that instance now, if I was like, I can't speed because the speed limit says 35, that's the speed I have to drive, what stage would I be in?
Conventional.
Conventional. If I was like, I'm gonna speed because it's fun, what stage?
Pre-conventional.
Pre-conventional. If I'm like, most of the time I wouldn't drive this fast, but my wife is literally going into labor right now, it's more important that I get my wife to the hospital than following this other rule. What stage am I in that? Post-conventional. Make sense? Okay. All right. Another thing that some of the people looked at was speech and modeling and imprinting. Speech, modeling, and imprinting. If you remember, there's a guy that had a bunch of ducks that he studied. Remember? He had ducks that he hung out with, and then the ducks, like when they would, there's pictures of him, I think it's in our text, like swimming, and the ducks would follow him around. In the cartoons, they would always kind of make jokes about that, where they would follow people and the ducks would be like mama, and it's a guy or a dog or something, right? So that learning that occurs like in an instant, where youth, like a baby or a young dog or a duck or whatever, identifies with somebody else or learns something like very quickly, what term is that?
Imprinting.
That's imprinting, okay? What is it when, as kids learn how to speak, they start to go like ba ba ba, goo goo goo, what's that called? Babbling. Eventually they'll say like one word and then they'll start saying phrases, like daddy home, or my son right now is like, show, Daniel, show, and then he runs around, show, Daniel Tiger. You ever see Daniel Tiger? It's like a Mr. Rogers kind of spin-off, but animated. So he runs around and he says, show, Daniel, show. What's that example of? It's the term for that. When you say like a couple words together, it's not really a sentence.
Isn't it telegraphic?
Telegraphic speech. Good. Okay. Another thing with kids in development is they're really bad at trying to see things from somebody else's perspective. So again, to use a story with my son, he's a hair puller right now. He was a biter, now he's a hair puller. He'll literally hold like chunks of hair. He'll rip hair out from kids, and they'll hold it up like it's the spoils of battle for him. And he rips the hair out, he's like, raw, like Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat, something like that, right? Anybody get that reference or not? Okay. Well, anyways, so what's that? The inability to see things from somebody else's perspective. What's that called?
Egocentric.
Egocentric is correct.
What was it?
Egocentric or egocentrism. Yep. And then another concept we talked about in this chapter was parenting styles. Parenting styles, remember we drew it out on the board? So the two variables we looked at in parenting styles were what? Or the two variables we looked at with parenting styles?
Discipline and love.
Discipline and
Love.
love or concern, right? So best scenario for kids is you have a parent that's high on both. Because a parent that's high on love but low on discipline is going to give a kid whatever they want. They're going to think, oh, kid wants this, I'll get it for him. Kid wants this, I'll get it for him. That's bad, right? Best scenario, high on both. And then I had you guys give examples from TV shows, you remember? So what's an example of one that's high on both? What's that term? And then give me an example from like a movie or a TV show or whatever. High on both, yep.
Authoritarian.
Authoritative.
Oh, dude.
Authoritative, high on both. Authoritarian is high on one but low on the other.
Democratic.
Nope. Well, Democratic, they'll use that kind of interchangeably with authoritative, but so somebody that's high on discipline and low on love, think like Joseph Stalin, authoritarian government, authoritarian leader, high discipline, no love for his people, authoritarian, right? So authoritative would be like, I think an example I used in a few classes was Danny Tanner from Full House, right? Every episode of Full House, one of the kids does something stupid, tries to cover it up, it's kind of humorous. At the end they get caught, and then they have like a sit-down moment where they talk through it and tell them why it was bad, right? And then, I love you, Dad. Oh, that's funny, blah, blah, blah. And then Uncle Joey says something silly in an animal voice or whatever, right? So, basically every episode, right? So Danny Tanner, authoritative, high on love, high on discipline. He acts this way on the show, but if you've seen the whole series or seen a lot of episodes, you can tell he really does care about his kids. But most of the time, he's very like heavy discipline, not a lot of love. Red Foreman from that 70s show, authoritarian. Okay? What's it called if you allow everything? Permissive, yep. That's high love, low discipline. And then uninvolved is low on both. So permissive would be like Regina George from Mean Girls.
Meet the Fockers.
So, what?
Meet the Fockers, the dad.
The hippie ones?
Yep,
or-
yep.
Okay. All right. So you guys understand that? Okay, remember also we talked about Erik Erikson's psychosocial development and how at each stage there's a struggle that everybody has to go through. So be aware of the struggles a little bit, that'll help you also. You don't have to list like those stages in order necessarily, but the fact that there's a struggle will help you. Okay, moving on to chapter 9. Chapter 9 had to do with motivation and emotion. Motivation and emotion. So let's start with basically the biological component to that. Again, in our clicker quiz, we kind of addressed that this week a little bit. What is it called, like a physical or psychological thing that's a necessity for an organism? The actual thing, a need. The tension the organism experiences if they don't get that need is a drive. So give me some words that are examples of needs.
Water, food,
Water, sleep, food,
shelter.
companionship, those things are the need. Okay, give me some words that would fit with the drive then. Thirst, hunger, coldness, etc. Okay, tiredness, good. Okay, so be able to identify and differentiate between needs and drives. Now also, regarding emotions, motivation, we talked about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So I'm going to give you some examples of scenarios and I want you to just say whether it be intrinsic or extrinsic, okay? So, Jarrett runs because he trains harder and all that because he wants to place higher because he wants to get a scholarship.
Extrinsic.
Extrinsic, okay? Daga stays up really late reading about the French Revolution because she finds it really interesting.
Intrinsic.
Intrinsic. Christian likes to play video games.
Intrinsic.
Enjoys it, intrinsic. Okay? You come here mostly because you wanted the extra credit.
Extrinsic.
Extrinsic. Okay? You came here because you enjoy learning.
Intrinsic.
Intrinsic. Understand the difference? Okay. All right. So now, extra credit, getting a scholarship, getting paid for something, something you can get because you do something. What's the blanket term for that? Incentive, yep. Economists use that term also. So there's a variety of different incentives that people can engage in. Now, remember, behaviorists are big on incentives, right? So behaviorists would say, nobody really has free will, the hardcore behaviorists, people are just responding to stimulus in their environment. I figure out the right thing, I can get anybody to do anything. If I figure out whatever they're motivated by, get them that right incentive, they'll jump through hoops, sing like a parrot, whatever, okay? I think I used the example of money in class. I said, in this class at least, I said, what would it take to get you to run down the office swearing the whole way and back? Did I use that example?
Dude, I'll do it for
Okay.
free.
I didn't even ask you, that's why. So, but most people in here, maybe there's some people that would be like, nah, probably not. But I mean, if literally $10 billion, if I literally had $10 billion here, some people, even they'd feel really guilty.
Yeah.
They'd take the money and donate like 9.5 billion to charity, and they'd be like, oh, I'm stuck with $500 million, right? So, but some people in here that still thinks that that's probably not the best idea, at some dollar amount probably would do it, right? And they justify their actions by saying, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I got $10 billion and I can help so many people another way, right? So, hardcore behaviorists think, again, people don't really have free will, they're just responding to stimulus in their environment. What theory believes that people really do have free will? Humanistic. So, if you see on the test it says, which of the main contemporary approaches would believe this? When I say contemporary approaches, I'm referring to the 8 that are talked about frequently in the text, that we did the table assignment on, right away, the first chapter. So in short, if you remember now, what are the 8 main theories?
Psychoanalytic, humanistic.
Psychodynamic, humanistic, behavioral, cognitive,
Sociocultural.
sociocultural, biological, biopsychosocial, and evolutionary. Okay, so knowing those, hands down, especially for the final, but also for this test, knowing those and be able to apply them as it relates to motivation or emotion or social situations, knowing those concepts and be able to apply them will be very helpful for you, okay? So now, in humanism, everybody has free will. What is everybody striving for? What's that goal called? Self-actualization, okay? And they have to fulfill the base needs before they can move up in that idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Okay, if people engage in behavior that's good, that makes it more likely that they'll adjust to society and do well, what is that called? It's an evolutionary term. Starts with the A. If it's good behavior. It's adaptive. If you engage in behavior that is like positive or good, so you go home, you feel stressed about this test, you're like, I gotta study, and you study more. Adaptive. You're like, I feel stressed about this test, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna shoot heroin. Okay? Yeah. Hopefully you don't go that. Okay. A more common example would be, I'm gonna watch 4 episodes on Netflix and then just put off studying, right?
That's called senioritis.
That's maladaptive. It makes it less likely that you'll do well. Okay? Maladaptive is like behaviors or patterns that don't help an organism adjust. So it's not necessarily directly self-harm, it's not like suicidal or like intentionally hurting, but overall it has a pattern of hurting somebody else, right? Okay, we also talked about some theories of emotion. So if you look in your book, 386, if you guys have your book on you, it looks like this. So those of you that are at home, page 386, it looks like this, right? Should I get it in there somewhere?
Hi, people.
There you go. Okay, so there's a couple of sections in here where it asks you something about a theory. It'll say, this is the cause of emotion according to this theory, and you have to identify the theory, all right? So for example, one of the theories basically says that you see something that's stressful, okay, and you interpret that basically as good or bad, and then that leads to a physical response and an emotional reaction. at the same time. Okay? So you can see if they occur at the same time, what's that called? You look in the graphic. What's the one that has in the middle two things at the same time? Schachter-Singer cognitive arousal theory. Okay? So, what's the one where it's like there's stimulus that leads to you doing something with your face, so smiling, frowning, whatever, and then that muscle feeling in your face leads to you thinking, oh, I'm happy, oh, I'm sad, and then that leads to the physiological response.
Facial feedback.
Facial feedback, okay? So, there's like 3 questions in the matching section about this where you have to identify which theory fits. So, 386 will help you with that one, all right? Okay, that leads us to chapter 10, stress and health. So, this test, having to do a bunch of stuff that's coming up, being in a rough situation with your parents or your boyfriend or your work or whatever, that in and of itself is not stress. What would those things be called?
Stressors.
Stressors. Stress is then what?
The cause.
Reaction.
Your reaction. Yep, stressor is what causes it. Stress is your reaction. Could be behavioral, could be cognitive, could be physiological, right? So a lot of what our chapter talks about is the physiological reaction. What is the general term for the steps that people go through physiologically when they're responding to stress? Remember I drew it out.
I don't know.
I literally drew it out on the board. It's kind of like a bell curve. Okay, so you have alarm. In the middle you have resistance. And then at the end you have exhaustion, right? You remember the stages that would help you also. What's this called?
What's that at the end?
Exhaustion.
Exhaustion. Yep. It's called GAS. What's GAS stand for?
General adaptation syndrome. General adaptive something.
Yes, general adaptation syndrome.
Gotcha.
Yep, good. So that's the term for the general progression that people and animals go through when they experience stress physiologically. So it's a very physiological thing. So if you experience something, let's say deadlines in school. For a lot of people, do deadlines help you? Like, if you know there's an assignment due the next day, does that help you get motivated to get it done? Okay, so if it helps you, what's that called? What type of stress are you experiencing? What's the term for positive? Eustress, okay? If it becomes so much that it's overwhelming, what is that called then? Distress. So be able to identify different scenarios with that also. Now, in addition to that, when you experience stress, you have to evaluate whether it's going to affect you or not. So the examples I think I gave were you're in the lunchroom and some dude drops their books, like they do one of these things, right? Like I did to when we were watching Silence of the Lambs, remember?
Yeah,
I didn't do that to you, Shalini, but in period 7, right at dark scene, So
Really?
Yeah, I dropped it on the floor from about this high up. It was,
What did they do?
I'm a terrible person, sorry.
What did they?
They jumped a little bit, it wasn't them. But Taylor turned around, she saw me smiling and smirking, she's like, you sit down right now. She chewed me out. You remember that?
Yeah, I thought you were gonna sneak up and scare me.
Yeah. That's pretty good. But she just turned around, you sit down right now. It was pretty great. So anyways, you hear that noise, right? You're in the commons, you hear this noise,
Go.
okay?
God, you got
You
me.
turn around for a second, you're gonna be and then you see, oh, it's just Mr. Slocum or Taylor or whoever being stupid. You turn around and continue your conversation, right? So that initial weighing out whether something is a threat to you or not, what's that called? No, the jolt you feel is alarm, but cognitively, you're like, is this a threat to me or not? What's that called? No? Appraisal, what type? No, primary or secondary?
Primary.
Primary. Is this a threat to me or not? Primary, okay? Secondary then is, what am I gonna do in relationship to it? So, if If it's me, one time I do this, drop the book, you look away, no, I thought about it, but I didn't want to again. Because everybody was looking down and writing, and I'm like, okay, I'll give you a break. But anyways, so after you evaluate, good or bad, does it affect me? After that, then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. So again, somebody drops a book, you might look over your shoulder, kind of make sure they're not doing it again. That's secondary appraisal. If you turn around and you see, oh, it's some dude with a gun, your secondary appraisal is a lot different than random dude with a book, right? So primary basically is, does it affect me or not? Is it a threat to me? Secondary is, what am I going to do related to it? All right? Okay. Last thing I'll talk about as it relates to stress is what's called conflict situations. Remember there were 4 examples we talked about? I think we talked about 4, but the text had 5 or 6 listed. This is where, like, let's say you were trying to weigh out should you come here or not, but then you also had another thing that you could have done. So you could have went and watched a movie with your friends, right? So what are those conflict situations? What are they called, like just the words for them in general?
Approach, avoidance.
Approach, avoidance, approach, avoidance, double approach avoidance, multiple approach avoidance. Okay? So, let's say you sit by 2 girls in class that you think are both really sweet and cute and nice and all that, and you're talking to them and literally at the same time both of them ask you to go to prom. Okay? What's that? That's some cruel experiment probably, but what would that be?
Double approach, avoidance.
No. Approach, because both are overwhelmingly positive. Okay, so if you had 2 girls that asked you and like both of them had like clear positive and negative qualities, you know, in reality everybody does, but you're like, she's really fun, they're both really cute, she's really fun, but she's got a real super annoying laugh, just drives me bonkers, and then she's really fun too, but she talks so much and it's kind of annoying, like real excessively. So double approach avoidance, because you have good and bad in each scenario, right? Okay? What if it's like, you go in to the doctor, you got a real bad situation, they're like, okay, you can probably die or have this really painful experimental medical treatment.
Double
Avoidance.
Avoidance, because both options are overwhelmingly negative. Okay? So in reality, we never have in life something that's 100% positive or 100% negative, right? But if it's overwhelmingly both negative, avoidance. Overwhelmingly both positive, approach. So be able to identify some scenarios with that also. All right, that leads us to social interaction, chapter 11. Social interaction is all about how people relate to each other in groups and how group forces affect individuals. If you're in a group and you do better in terms of your performance on something because of the presence of the group, what is that called? I'm gonna kill that fly.
I'm good at killing
I'm
flies.
gonna kill that fly away.
Can you repeat your question?
Okay, you do better, you're in a group and you do better, like you run faster, your test scores are better, you do more pull-ups, whatever. That's social facilitation. You do worse, you don't perform as well. Social inhibition. If you're in a big group, let's say you're a group of 3 or 4 for a project you're working on in school and you're like, yeah, I'm in a group with Maddie and Marissa and Janaea and Malia. They work pretty hard. I can kind of slack here a little bit. What's that called? Social loafing, yep.
Can you say those again? Like
Yeah.
just the 3 things.
Yep, facilitation, loafing, and inhibition. Facilitation, loafing, and inhibition.
Do that one thing.
What's up? Figured it out? So do you see, can you think of scenarios where all those exist?
Yeah.
Yep.
Every group
In the notes, it's called social impairment, or is that different?
impairment would be the same. I've heard it both.
Okay.
So,
But it doesn't matter like impairment.
no, the way it's worded, it's not, you know it either way. Yeah. Inhibition would be, technically inhibition would be like you'd be less likely to do something. You know what inhibitions are? Like when you drink, that's the first thing that goes away is your inhibitions. So social inhibition would be like you don't want to engage in something in a social setting. So like karaoke. Is it karaoke or karaoke?
Karaoke.
Singing, karaoke. Okay. Anyways, so you're out at a place and there's a whole bunch of people there. Social inhibition would be like, I don't want to do anything. There's like 3 people there and you know all of them really well, maybe I'd be more likely to do it, right? So impairment would be then you start singing and your singing is worse, like way off key and all that. But some people actually get better when they have an audience. That'd be what? Facilitation. Do you see the difference then between impairment and inhibition? Okay. All right. Now let's say you go to Vegas and you're like, I'm just gonna party like crazy because I'm in Vegas and I'm in a big group and everybody's doing it here. What's that example of? De-individuation. De-individuation. Yep. Okay, let's say I come in, I run in the commons and the person I'm talking to knows I'm a teacher, I'm like, sit down. And they listen, they do what I want because I'm authority figure. What's that?
Yeah, obedience.
Obedience. Yeah, obedience. Yeah. So obedience is because of an authority figure. So compliance not necessarily. What's it called if you, so compliance is where you're pressured by other people but not an authority figure. So your friend is like, sit down. And you're like, okay. What if you're in a group and they all like dress the same and pretty much listen to the same music and all that, and nobody tells you, you need to listen to this, you need to do this, but over time you start to do the same thing as that. That's conformity. Yep. Okay, so what are some variables that we look at when we're picking like who we want to hang out with or date or whatever?
Music.
Okay. Similar interests. What's up?
Was attractiveness one?
Yeah, attractiveness, yeah, you remember the video we watched, we talked about that. What else?
Similar interests.
Similar interests. Personality traits. So remember we talked about similarity and then what's called complementarity. So if you sit in class next to somebody 2 classes in a row and they're really good at writing papers and you suck, but you're really good at math and they're not, so you can help each other with stuff, that might be helpful. But what else? I gave you a clue and I said you sit by them in class, you're in classes together with them. What else? Proximity, right? So you're evaluating somebody that you wanna date and you know they're gonna go to a different college. So I mean, hopefully I don't ruin somebody's day by saying this, but I'll go ahead and say the truth anyways. But relationships that are in high school, when people go to different colleges, usually, not always, but usually, that's a strain in the relationship and often the relationship ends, right? So that's because of proximity, okay? So hopefully like 2 people aren't dating here and I just caused some problems, but it's the truth. Okay, what is it now if you're walking, you leave here and you see another high school student walking in the hallway and you're the only one, like for some reason you had to go to the bathroom or whatever and you're the last person to get out of the building, but you see somebody else and they drop all their books, you stop and help them, but you're not expecting them to pay you or anything, what's that called? Altruism. Now let's say we all leave at the same time, or you're by yourself and you see that person drop their books. In which situation would they be more likely to get help? By yourself, because there's more pressure on you to help them out, right? What's that called?
Bystander effect.
Bystander effect, yep. Good. Okay. All right, let's talk about theories of personality now. Freudian approach, psychodynamic approach. What are the three parts of the personality?
Id, ego, superego.
Id, ego, superego. And yes, it's chapter 12 now. Yep. Id, ego, and superego. So, which one operates entirely in the unconscious?
Ego. Superego.
Id. Id. Ego, all of them have a little bit in the unconscious, subconscious, but id entirely in the unconscious. So id in the analogy that I use in class, not a perfect analogy again, but id is the devil, wants what it wants right away. The ego is the person weighing out. They operate on the reality principle, like, okay, I really am mad at that person that just cut me off, and I really would like to ram my car into them, but if I do that, it's gonna cost me a couple $1,000s and I get in trouble and my family would be mad at me. So then the superego is telling you, don't do that, don't do it, it's bad, all that stuff, right? So ego, person in the middle, superego, don't do that, it's bad, id, do it, I want it right now and take care of business. Go ahead.
What's the difference between like the subconscious and the unconscious?
Yeah, you open your book to find that chapter 12. Look for the iceberg. I'll show you. I don't want to draw it out because that would take a while. They should have the iceberg in there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, 478. So I use the term subconscious kind of synonymously with preconscious. So I've heard it used that same way. So if you look at the graphic on page 478, it's basically unconscious, subconscious or preconscious, and then conscious. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sub is like just below the surface, whereas unconscious is like way down there.
So like, are we gonna have to like know the difference? Like,
No, not really.
okay.
Yep.
So is yours?
It's just. Yeah.
Okay, so id, ego, superego. All right, now, we also talked about defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are on page 480 if you're curious. So I give you some scenarios, and you have to identify what defense mechanism is being used. So, let's say you're frustrated with me after this review session because you're like, it's the end of the year, and I'm a senior, and why did you schedule a test in addition to the final, you jerk. Okay? People are nodding their head, right? So then you go home and you like kick your dog or something, right? But you're really mad at me, so you go after your dog, your brother, or whatever. What's that an example of?
Displacement.
Displacement, okay? Displacement.
Yeah.
What if you feel like you're mad at me, but instead you like overcompensate the other way? You're like, hello, nice to see you. And you're like really happy instead. You do the opposite.
Compensation.
Reaction formation. Compensation is where, let's say you feel like you're weak, so then you like overdo it. So you take steroids and lift a lot, or maybe you feel like unconsciously you're weak, so you listen to loud music and like are really aggressive to kind of compensate for being weak. Okay? All right, what's the difference between personality and temperament?
You're born with temperament?
You're born with temperament, so it's patterns of feelings and behavior, tendencies that you're born with. Personality kind of develops and changes over time. Okay. All right, that leads us to chapter 13. All right. 13 was on disorders. What's the book that's used to diagnose disorders?
DSM-5.
Diagnostic and
Statistics.
Statistical Manual, 5th edition. Okay? So if you're looking at like, what are variables that you're looking at to try to determine if somebody has a disorder? What are those called?
Symptoms?
No, a more technical term than symptoms. Look at the name of the DSM. What's the first word?
Diagnostic.
Diagnostic.
To diagnose.
And then what's the second word?
Statistical.
Diagnostic criteria. Diagnostic criteria. So you're like, okay, remember how a lot of the disorders were, you had to experience this for 6 months? They always had that 6-month thing on there for a couple weeks, or it varied based on the disorder, but a lot of times it was a matter of months. Those, like step by step, here's what you check for, those are diagnostic criteria. Okay, what are disorders where you have a loss of identity and a loss of memory? Dissociative disorders. There's 3 main types. All are generally caused by some type of psychological trauma. It wouldn't be a dissociative instance if like you had a traumatic brain injury like the lady talked about today. You hit your head, you forget stuff. That's not a dissociative issue. That's a traumatic brain injury, right? So, what are the 3 types of dissociative disorders?
Identity fugue.
Dissociative fugue, dissociative identity disorder, dissociative amnesia.
Amnesia, okay? Amnesia, you're still you, one personality, one expression of yourself, but you lose memory. What's the key variable in fugue? Fugue, you
travel
leave.
someplace and-
Yep, you forget stuff and you flee. And then what's the key variable in dissociative identity disorder?
Split.
You're like borderline.
You have multiple personalities, yep. What's the term for the main personality for you? No, alters are the others.
Yeah,
The ego.
The maid.
You go into somebody's house, host, yep, host is correct. Okay, let me give you some examples of disorders. I want you to tell me what category they belong to, all right? Bipolar, seasonal affective disorder, and depression.
Mood.
Mood disorders. Now I'd have to use the term in this, but borderline personality, so there's a variety of types, right? Borderline narcissistic, etc. Okay, what's the difference between a delusion and a hallucination?
Delusions or beliefs, hallucinations are
Things you actually experience.
Things you see or whatever, right? So, if I believe that I am the fastest man alive, what's that? A delusion. If Jessica sees, I always use a monkey, I don't know why, but sees a monkey up on that shelf by the red cup,
That's hallucination.
hallucination. You think your phone's ringing, it's really not. You you literally feel it vibrating, I swear. Hallucination. You believe that you're gonna get into Harvard, but your GPA is like 3.2. Delusion, right? Okay. What's disorders where you have hallucinations, delusions, erratic behavior, different beliefs, kind of a split with reality? What's that? Schizophrenia, good. How about excessive concern tied to a specific object or thing? Phobias, yep. Okay, last chapter, chapter 14. This is all on therapy, and a lot of this actually I'm going to end up talking about tomorrow. But in treatment of phobias, right? There's generally 2 methods that people will follow. One is probably accepted by 95% of people. Most of the time they do this method where we saw in the video with the lady of clowns, right? She started out, they talked about clowns. She would give a scale where she'd say 0 to 100 how concerned she was in that situation. After talking about clowns, he'd show her a scary clown, and then a little bit more scary clown, and then they'd watch a movie with the clown, and eventually she's in the room with Mr. Giggles. You remember? Okay? So what's that called? What type of therapy where you gradually expose somebody to increasing stimuli? Yeah, but more specifically, where you gradually expose them. Yep, but what? Desensitization is the second word. What's the first word? Yeah, we'll talk about that tomorrow. It's systematic desensitization.
Got that half.
So it's following a formula and doing it, right? Okay, so that's one way they treat people with phobias. So like me, I always make fun of myself. I was afraid to talk to girls. It wouldn't be a phobia, I don't think. But like, you never know. I kept trying, but.
Consistent with your phobia.
Yes, but I would literally feel sick sometimes. I'm like, my buddy's like, go talk to that girl, and I'm like, no. And I like feel like, what's the dude from South Park that always throws up on the girl?
Butters.
No, it's not Butters. No. No, it's not. It's either Stan or Kyle. I think it's Stan. He always throws up on Wendy. Yeah, it was Stan. So, let's say that I had a phobia of girls, right? And they decide to do the one way where, you know, I talk about girls and then think about girls, and then eventually they like have me be in a room with a girl and I'm like, oh, freaking out, right? Systematic desensitization. What if they like take me to an all-girls college and like drop me off there and it's out in the middle of nowhere and like literally everybody there is a girl. And I'm like, what do I do? What's that called? Flooding, yeah. So that's like Fear Factor style. If you ever seen Fear Factor, you guys remember that show? So they got, somebody's afraid of snakes, here's a pit of snakes, drop them in there, good luck, right? That's flooding. Can you see why that's not accepted as a methodology?
I like it.
Well, and are you gonna go back to the therapist if they do that too?
Dude, I bet.
Probably not.
You're locked in there.
Okay, what's it called if you, a psychodynamic therapy approach, where you typically lay down on one of those couches and then you just talk and run with it. Run every connection you think of. Reassociation. Yep. Hey, keep it down for the people at home so they can hear. Okay, what is it called? Most therapists try this. They try a combination of things. So it's antipsychotic medication and maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, where they talk you through your behaviors and try to get you to make more adaptive choices. And then they also do something out there, pulling in all kinds of methods. What's the blanket term for that where many methods are used? I should ask this question. Who's read the chapter? Two people. Yeah. So we should read, obviously. Clicker quiz is going to be hard tomorrow if you don't read it.
What's it start with?
E. A combination of therapy approaches.
Eclectic.
Eclectic
approach.
is correct. Good.
Got you.
Thank you. All right, I mean, I understand it's the end of the year and blah, 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 and a lot of you are seniors, but, I mean, dual credit class and one person's read, like, oh, come on, guys, work with me here. Okay. What if, you've probably seen this in like daycare rooms or, well, we kind of do this in the weight room also, where if people work out a set number of times per session, they meet what we call the Packer Challenge, and then they can get a shirt. And then if they've done it so many times, they get a plaque.
Token economy.
Token economy, yep. So the stuff's not really worth anything, but they're tokens, right? It could be stickers. Doesn't even have to be a physical thing you get. It could be a check mark on a bulletin board or something. Okay, I told you a story about my buddy, at least one class, my buddy Dusty. His dad, when he was younger, his dad Gary chewed. And Gary, Dusty's like, can I have some of your candy? And it was like, I think it was Copenhagen Spearmint or something, I don't know. I don't think it was just straight Copenhagen, but it was like flavored stuff. And Gary's like, okay, here you go. And gave it to like 5-year-old Dusty, 6-year-old Dusty. He ate a bunch and then he barfed everywhere. And then ever since then, like some of our older buddies that were in rodeo and that chewed would offer it to Dusty and he'd be like, yuck. He couldn't stand it, right? That's an example of basically a taste aversion. It's an extremely strong classically conditioned response. But what type of therapy would that be?
Aversion therapy.
Aversion or aversive therapy. Yep. So somebody drinks, they don't like give them so much alcohol that they get real sick and whatever. That'd be unethical. But they give you a shot actually that makes it so that you have a severe reaction to alcohol. So the idea is then basically they want you to develop that conditioned response. That's aversive therapy. Okay, we also talked about yesterday resistance and transference. What's the difference between those things?
Resistance is when you resist the therapy that's being given to you, and transference is when you take what you're given and you put it on someone else.
It's not necessarily what you're given with transference, but you're correct in resistance where with free association, you're literally supposed to say everything that comes to mind. Dream interpretation, you keep a journal, you're supposed to write down everything you dream. Everybody, I don't literally want to know, okay? So, but if you think of the most messed up dream you've ever had in your whole life, most people in here probably wouldn't want to share that with a therapist, or obviously right now, okay? But with a therapist, you'd be like, I don't want to write that dream down because that's real weird. That's resistance, right? So transference is where you, let's say you're upset at your mom, and then you start to be upset at the therapist. It's not really that you're upset at the therapist, but it's that you're upset at your mom. So you transfer some emotions or frustrations or whatever onto the therapist, okay? All right, any other questions for the good of the cause? So again, the test is not tomorrow, it's on Thursday. Do the Twitter, if you don't want to do the Twitter chat, you don't have to, but I'd read through the questions at least. That will help you prepare for the essay, okay? Can you push stop, Michelle?
Bye, guys.